Ladies and gentlemen, here we are again, ACHL digital platform, and my goodness me, am I looking forward to this particular session. Two gentlemen I know personally and professionally very well, and for a substantial amount of time. Before I introduce them, just tongue in cheek, I joked earlier that if I was to introduce them as a double act, or maybe a boxers or wrestlers, I would introduce them as the gentleman and the hitman. Now, I will leave it up to everybody listening to see who is who, but without further ado, I'm now going to introduce Des Vertannes, who everybody knows as an industry advisor, and he's also board chairman of eCargoWare. And then we've got a newly bearded, and I do like it, Stan Wraight, who's also CEO of SASI, and he's a strategic advisor, and one of his focus points, and he's always talking about it, is how do we future-proof? And probably now more than ever, that's a very valid statement. So gentlemen, thank you so much for giving up your time. Thanks for joining the list of some of the fantastic speakers and guests that we've already had on. So you gentlemen are doing a little bit of a roundup and a little bit of a review of all that's been happening. So I know it's going to be very fluid.
Yeah, good day, Chris.
So I'm looking
Pleasure
forward
to join, especially with Des.
Yeah. Ditto that, Stan.
Yeah, I'm just looking at the difference in your background. So I can see, Stan, there you are, you're focused on the aircraft. And I can see, Des, you've enjoyed the lockdown, my friend, because you've certainly consumed a few from the glass of corks that's behind you. So,
well, the only worrying thing, Chris, you know, we've seen a lot of contraction, right? The only expansion I can tell you that I know from personal experience has been my waistline during this period. So, you know, that's the sad part of it.
Yeah, like many
well,
of us.
Hey, Des, that's why the screen only comes up to here, because likewise, I put on about 12 kilos, I think. So yeah, no, I've got to get out there.
Yeah, we need to
get back to eating bad airplane food so that I can lose weight.
Yeah. More agility and mobility. That's what's called for.
There you go. There you go. Now, you spoke that word there. There's agility and resilience. Obviously, that's ever more important now, and everybody in the industry knows. And the terminology of unprecedented has been repeated so many times. We don't need to go there, but the practical sizing of the industry has affected everybody. So, I think all of us from the very beginning, we've got a genuine respect, and we also need to focus on the people that are being displaced within the industry from the industry they love. And please God, they'll be invited back sooner rather than later. So now, moving on, and what I'd like to do is I'd just like to cover the principles that everybody else has had, which is we've been talking about from crisis to care. And one could also say that, you know, this crisis is now an opportunity to correct many of the errors that our industry has fallen into from the past. And we're also looking at genuine collaboration and true initiatives. So how the industry can come together as it's now practical sizing. So the first thing I would like to ask you both is, from your general impressions and experience and involvement, what do you think have been the biggest disruptors or disruptions that people have sat up and taken notice of and are now taking consideration of moving forward? So, Des, if I can start with you.
Well, Chris, I think over the decades, right, we've had many a disruption. You know, we've seen crisis upon crisis. And of course, it culminated from our industry's perspective, all the rest of the issues that occurred when they occurred, you know, whether there was the initial Middle Eastern war of the 70s, whether you look at the oil crisis of the 80s, whether you then looked at 9/11, the subsequent SARS, MERS, then of course the tsunami, then of course culminating with the financial crisis. While all of those were tragic at the time, impacting us, I don't think any of those mirror what we've just experienced with this pandemic. Okay, because this pandemic has really brought the world to almost a closure.
Yep.
You know, it's literally ceased all form of economic activity, education. You imagine people's entertainment, nowhere, and of course people's ability to travel, because you know when we talked about the preservation of human life and health, This is what this pandemic has been about, the preservation. So to emerge from anything like this, I would have to mirror it to probably something akin to the last World War, okay? When basically the world shut down and then everybody had to wait till the end of it. And then you emerge and then you think, now, how do we build a better future? Hopefully with everybody now being a little bit more collaborative, everybody's in the same boat, everybody's got levels of indebtedness, unprecedented, and really, which is going to impact generations to come.
Yeah.
So for me, I don't think we've ever lived through anything like this. So my view of the future, when we talk about a collaborative approach, it's not going to be like anything I've experienced or had to undertake before. I think we'll be forced to do things that if you're not going to be part of it, you're going to be left. It won't be your choice to stay out of it.
Yeah.
You either have to be part of a collaborative, an alliance, or an integrated solution within our industry, or I'm afraid you'll just become a victim, sadly, of this pandemic.
Yeah. No, I agree. I agree, Des. And taking that forward, and Stan, I know, and just to repeat something I said earlier, people are saying now that this crisis is an opportunity to correct many of the errors that we've allowed the business to develop and mature into. So I know you're quite outspoken on that one. As far as moving forward now, where do you think the industry has to focus?
Well, there's a couple of things. Number one is, 60% of the capacity that we had for air cargo in the past was in passenger airplanes. Wide body 777 or 787, for example, A350 can take, depending on the route, can take anywhere from 25 tons on a long haul up to 40 tons on a short haul. That's gone, and it's not coming back in a lot of cases. I mean, the amount of 777s that are being grounded for a long time to come, for example, are just, unbelievable. KLM retiring the Combi, which is desperately needed in times like this, is an absolute shock. But the leaders around the world that are making these decisions, I don't think they really get it, and I don't think we've done a good job of telling them why these things have to change. It is unbelievable. That's one thing. The second thing is that the air cargo divisions of the airlines and also the airports and the GHAs and everyone else who are living off that capacity, they have to understand that cargo has to be treated as a core business from now on, because without the cargo contribution, the passage is not going to be there for a long time to come. And I think the optimistic dissertations that's coming out of some airline managers and everything else, it's just not going to happen. The economic impact of what's happened with COVID on individual people, they won't have discretionary income like they had before to take vacations over to Bali or whatever. That's one issue. Quarantines and the stop of the spread of this virus. If anyone, in the US, in a survey recently, over 40% of the people said they won't take a vaccine. There's these anti-vaxxers. So, I mean, anyone who thinks this is a 12-month, 24-month phenomenon we're going through, forget it. It's going to go on for a while. Legal issues. Companies have told me, we've canvassed a few companies, that sending people to conventions or sending people overseas on business trips, you could be sued.
Yeah.
To get COVID. So, all of these things lead me to believe for the future that we're going to be seeing a real 5-year catch up to get back to where we were with capacity, at least. So what does that do? Number one, I think it's an opportunity. And why do I say that? We gave away, as an industry, the dialogue with the consumers, with the pallet programs and all the rest of it with the forwarders. We gave away our ability to handle cargo properly when we allowed the integrators to take all the small package traffic away from us. And now we're moving to a situation where e-commerce, for example, means that it's all back to small package, and we can't cope. So if the industry's smart right now, they'll say, reduce capacity. We have to get more into what really has to fly, and what has to fly in the future is things that are essential for production, for just in times, which might still exist, or for health and safety. And if we don't get ourselves in a collaborative way, like Des mentioned, geared up for that, well, we're in big trouble.
Yeah, no, 100%. Now, moving on, but with that in mind, Des, and you've had a lot of experience. You've been carrier, you've been GHA, you've been involved with AMI, wholesaling. You've done an awful lot, and obviously in your IATA role, you dealt with airports and everybody else. Now, one of the things that I've never been able to understand, and I think it's something that's got a great opportunity now to move forward, is airports have got such a unique opportunity to actually take, to a certain degree, charge and give directives and give clarity and give easy code of conduct or certain stipulations for all of the tenants in their ecosystem and their community to do something in a certain way to enhance the reputation of the airport, the capability, and to attract carriers. Because the one thing with the way things are at the moment, a carrier can fly in and it can fly out. A GHA stays or it goes out. But if the airport did certain things differently as a community, then there'd start to be differentials which people would start to look to. Now, what would you do? What would you do if you had the chance to rewrite the formula?
Well, first and foremost, there's airports and there's airports.
Correct.
If you take a look at what I call big hub airports, okay, international, big major or entities, Heathrow, Frankfurt, JFK, CDG. If you, well, I wouldn't bring people like Hong Kong and Singapore, because I think there's a different animal and a different attitude in Asia. But I'm talking about predominantly the West. Okay, so even in LA, I'd go so far, San Francisco, Chicago, Atlanta. If you look at all these airports, they have an infrastructure that's been very much tailor-made and built around the movement of people. Okay, supplemented with a little bit of terminal capacity, cargo terminal capacity, because they know cargo has some value to those carriers, particularly the hub carriers, combination carriers. But if you take a look at where we're going to emerge from, we're talking about, to Stan's point, if passengers aren't going to return till 2024, 2025, and etc., passenger capacity is still down circa around 85% to 90%. I mean, that is drastic. Okay?
Incredible.
Drastic.
Yeah.
So for airports, these big airports, to suddenly believe that they can adapt themselves to become a little bit more cargo friendly, trying to accommodate not just freighters, but freighters, whatever it is, they've got to become a little bit more realistic in the fact they've got to look at their infrastructure. Yeah. Are they going to spend money on their infrastructure? These big airports? I don't believe so. The only reason they'll do it is if there is government support to help them rekindle employment. Because one of the big casualties of our pandemic is employment.
Yep.
And you can basically talk about all the focuses being on reigniting world trade, getting the economies going. You've seen a lot of sentiment and obviously press about the trade wars that are going on between the US and China, for example. There's going to be some fallout as a result. If these countries are in such debt, one of the things they're going to be looking to is, at this moment in time, how do they reignite their economies? But more importantly, how do they bring and ignite and re-employ their youth? So if you want to start and bring in youth employment or stimulate any form of employment, you're going to have to look at all sorts of infrastructure issues within your particular borders. And I think every government will start to look at that. They look at the huge debt they have. They're going to have to try and somehow stimulate employment. And if they can work and look at the importance of the air trade element of their economic growth, then I believe they will start to be able to provide some subsidies or help or financial incentives to airports, allowing them to become a little bit more cargo friendly. So that to me is important. But then, of course, you've got the counterbalance that you have these smaller airports who have been a lot more agile, who hitherto were told, you're the guys that have to handle the freighters, because these big airports didn't want them. Okay, so they're going to be saying, hang on, we have the capacity and the flexibility and agility to be able to do a little bit more if required. But I think that's where the battles will be drawn, Chris, you know, between the needs for Heathrow, because again, you're going to look at connectivity, all right? Because everybody can't fly around the world. Whatever type of aircraft you're going to look at connectivity. And these big hubs have to provide that connectivity. And to me, I think as long as there's somebody from the very highest level of these airport institutions going to the government and saying, we're going to have to focus on logistics, air logistics. You've always focused on seaports before because, you know, you know that 98% of your business left seaports. Now, this is the time to give a focus on air logistics, because we've got, other than the PPE crisis that we've had, we're going to have a vaccine crisis on our hands. And you're going to have to help us make these modifications because we can't fund that ourselves.
Yeah, 100%, Des. Now, before we come to vaccines, one of the things in the continuing sequence, Stan, I'd like you to comment on is most of the people that we've had on the show, and they've been very supportive and endorsing each other, and they've had similar outlooks. They're all pretty much open to the fact that digitization and you know, just technology has not been taken forward as quickly and as effectively as it should do. So I know this is an area that you're very passionate about. Now, firstly, very quickly, why do you think we've been so slow? And now, what do you think is going to be the catalyst to bring people back up to speed?
Okay, well, I'd just like to start with a few comments on what Des just said, because, you know, the big black hole on airport, shall we say, accepting cargo is a core business other than just a real estate transaction, because that's the problem in the US. It's always been, how much will you pay me and will you give me a concession fee? And after that, I don't want it. We've designed a lot of warehouses. We've done master plans for major airports in Europe. And the mandate has always been from us to them is, listen, we've got to turn these terminals into a marketing tool for your airport.
Exactly.
Because airlines need cargo to make a profitable operation. One example I can give you is San Jose Airport. We designed a new terminal. Of course, we had environmental and economic things involved. But one of the things with San Jose, we interviewed one of the Chinese airlines. They were making $750 return for an economy ticket, okay? Cargo, they couldn't handle the perishables, which they wanted to handle because it was all going to San Francisco and Los Angeles because there was no facility at the airport to handle things like fresh fruit, cherries, and everything else. The terminal wasn't built for it. So just when we do these things, we have to get the airport to understand that if an airline takes cargo as a core business, then they've got to start treating the facilities as a core business of the airport as well, not just a real estate transaction. That's number one.
Exactly. Sorry, when I look on that, sorry, if I just make on that and what you said about your design, it doesn't matter how good the design you're able to do or to advise. If the airport and
we lost you there.
Lost sound for a second, Chris.
Oh, sorry. Have you got it back?
Yeah.
Blimey, that's. Did you two do that on purpose?
Yeah.
Turn me off. Yeah. No, what I'm saying is, irrespective of how good a design you put in place or you advise, if the airport and to a degree local councils and government don't also get involved in that to make sure that the access and the exit from that facility and everything else that goes around it isn't also supported, it's a great shame, isn't it?
Yeah, but Chris, that's just what I was going to say. In the work that we do, for example, there's no truck marshalling yard. We went to a full truck slot management system as mandatory at the airport. We don't go into just building a shell like a lot of the things. The other thing is the airport asked us to help them with the RFP, and the developers were told that they should come in and bid on the project with a client, and the
Yep.
client has to subscribe to what the airport needs in order to make the airport work for the airlines. So,
Yep.
I mean, we could do a whole show on that thing, but I just want to go back to what I said before about what you said before about digitization. You know, behind Des, I see a lot of half-empty bottles. Okay, and you know me well enough to know that I look at everything as half full. I've never looked at it. I refuse to accept defeat on any damn thing I work on. I'm pleased to tell you, we're engaged now and contracted with 4 different airports in North America. Okay, and well, in some cases, in 2 of the 4 cases, it's not just digitization. It's also facilities and marketing and route development and all the rest of it. But in two of the airports that we're working on now, in cooperation with government authorities, security, and everyone else, is into implementation of digital systems in the airport through cargo community systems.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
We go into this neutral. We help the airport to prepare a request for information, RFI, and then a proof of concept. And when we're finished, we'll put out a bid to various digital companies to bid on the cargo community system. But the cargo community system itself will be defined.
Yep.
And we're doing extensive stakeholder interviews, trucking companies, customs, security, agriculture, airlines, GHA, freight forwarders, trucking companies. They're all in our survey.
Yep.
And we're putting these in now in the US. And I can tell you right now, if it's in Dallas, it'll be, you know, we started it in Atlanta.
Yeah.
And I'd like to go back to that one in a moment. And then Dallas followed with another company, but they started it. Now, you know, Miami's looking at it. Houston, they're all going to jump on board. Philly's looking at it. Pittsburgh's going to be looking at it.
Yep.
It's coming. That's the digital side. The second thing is what we did was we went one step further. And what we organized in Atlanta was a data and logistics corridor with Schiphol, Amsterdam.
Yeah.
And there we had both cities sign an MOU. We had the 2 universities, Georgia Tech and the University of Delft sign an MOU. We had KLM and Delta involved, and we had Schiphol Airport Authority and Atlanta Airport Authority. Yeah. And then we went over and we got Cargonaut over in Amsterdam. Yeah. And we had to create in Atlanta to make that digital logistics corridor. We had to create something like Air Cargo Netherlands, which means a stakeholder committee. One, we had to create that. And the second thing we had to do was find a cargo community system.
Yeah.
Went out, we found one, and we implemented it. And it's in the process now. That philosophy from Atlanta, we're now going to replicate in Saudi Arabia. We're replicating it in India. And we've already got indications from Toronto, even that short haul. Toronto wants to link in as well. So we're starting. It's coming. The trouble is, who explains to the airport authorities that they should do this?
Yeah.
The airlines don't, which is the biggest heartbreak I have, because there's such turmoil within the airlines and the cargo divisions that they're not doing it. I got to say, Air Canada does. Air Canada gets it. And maybe that's because, we trained over 200 of Air Canada's management. They get it. They're involved in artificial intelligence. They're involved in machine learning. They're involved in drones. They get it. What now? I need KLM, Air France, and all the rest of them to get it as well, because we have a solution. We're working on it with the airports. The airports are enthused now. And they also, even more so than IATA, they get it that cargo is the key to their future and sustainability economically for the coming 4 or 5 years.
And ACI are completely behind that, are they?
No.
Okay. So
we've tried. The only ACI cargo committee is in North America.
Correct.
And I don't want to trash ACI because, Angela Gibbons, when she was there, we had many, many talks with her and everything else. No, they're not engaged at the moment. But my belief is that it's like you had Christine on from Pittsburgh and people from there. It's going to be a word of mouth thing amongst airports. And then when Dallas has a cargo community system and Atlanta have a cargo community system, don't you think that you know, Miami and Los Angeles are going to say, "Oh, we better have one"?
Yeah, no, and they are. They are. We spoke with Miami. We spoke with Miami as well.
Yeah, they're doing an evaluation at the moment.
Yeah.
Boston is decided to have one as well. The
Yeah.
Port Authority of New York and New Jersey, they'll come to it because right now people are avoiding JFK because of the fact of all the, like, for example, the truck congestion at JFK. It's an environmental disaster because trucks are dwelling for sometimes 5-6 hours.
Yeah.
But it's also an economic disaster with the new rules for trucks where the truck drivers can only stay on board for 10 hours total. Yeah. So, you know,
can I just say one thing? Like I said, the one thing that's come across very much from all the airports, and we did everybody in twos. And the nice thing is lots of the twos were people that were already like twins, you know, like the cities. So airport twins with, and they've been learning. And one of the classic examples is Brew Cargo. You know, what Brussels did was exceptional. So there is great examples out there, and I agree with you, Stan. It needs to be moved forward. Now, Des, what I'd like to ask you, and especially with reference to one of your previous roles. Now, all of the representative bodies are having to go through the same pain as the industry, because if they don't, then they're not representing the industry. So they're also practical sizing. So just this week, we've heard of certain people leaving certain organizations and others reducing, etc. There is going to be some change. Now, one of the things that I would do if I had a magic wand is I would get them all together and I would say, look, everybody's doing their own little bit with regards to what they consider to be the major issues. Why on earth now, as your resources and your experience and expertise is also being diluted, why do you not now all come together and agree on what are the critical requirements that the industry as a whole needs and the critical guidelines that have to be accepted? And coming back to your point, Stan, about either be there or it shows you don't care, that's something that needs to come across. So now, Des, what do you think about that? Do you think now's a time for everybody to start coming together, pull their resources, agree on who's got the best opportunity, and then everybody support those initiatives according to a practical and critical list that would do the industry good?
Okay. Well, you know, my immediate answer should be, of course, you'd start to look at doing just that. Collaboration between all the key associations. But let's wind the clock back to 2011. Okay, just after I joined, the establishment of GACAG, where you had 4 associations.
Yep.
Okay, IATA, FIATA, TIACA, and the Global Shippers Forum, which at that time had just been created. So you fundamentally had the supply chain through all its member associations. Of course, we're missing the airports. Don't get me wrong. And, you know, and before anybody else starts shouting. And of course, we're missing the regulatory associations. Yep. Okay, so understood. But at least that was a step to try and look at how we could collaborate and see how we could all share in the work that was necessary to make the supply chain more efficient, more safe, more secure, and of course economical. Now, when I take a look at associations and the changes that are taking place, and sad as I am to hear of Glyn's departure, very, very sad. I honestly believe that if I was in any one of those associations now, I would be literally calling the others to say, what could we be doing? And how could we share the workload? And because one of the things that will drive the benefits that will emerge, Chris, requires that of the regulatory bodies. And for me, you can't do things without the regulator being on your side. Because if you're going to try and institute any change, history has proved to show that if it's left and you're given a choice, guess what? How you do it today is how I'm going to do it tomorrow. Unless somebody comes and beats you over the head and says, do you know what? There's a new game effective from next month or next year. And that's how the game's going to be played, or you're not in the game.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then you're forced, you see,
Yeah.
to doing things. Well, the only party that can do that is not an association. An
Yeah. Yeah.
association cannot, by law, with the current regulatory around trade and trading practices and everything else, cannot force all its members to comply to one standard.
Yep.
You can recommend it, but you cannot enforce it.
Yeah. Clear.
However, a regulatory institution, governments, can do so.
Yep.
So for me, I would say I don't have the resource right now because, let's be honest, every one of their members are coming to the association right now and saying to them, how can you help me? How
Yep.
can you do this? How can you do that? So they've got their hands full themselves. But if I was heading any one of those today, I would reignite that collaborative association and allocate certain tasks and say, now you go and basically carry the weight of argument from the four of us to that regulatory body, get them on side. Let's make sure we have a date. Let's have some discussion, but let's have a date in which we can institute the change.
Yeah.
And from this date, digitization in whichever shape and form that will be, will occur.
Yep.
Okay? You're not going to be given a chance to bow out or opt out. And if you can't participate, find a partner who can.
Yep.
Doesn't mean you go out of business. You just may have to partner with somebody else who can do that part of the job for you.
Yeah.
And that, to me, is the defining way in which to influence the future.
Yeah, and logically, if those representative bodies show a consolidation and a solidarity, then when they pitch it to the regulators, it's a little bit like politics. The regulators know that it's going to be supported by the representative bodies. They've got a better chance of initiating something that's going to stick.
We've talked about companies, individuals, governments going to have to evolve, right?
Yeah.
Post this pandemic. That's no different to the trade associations. They're going to have to take a look at themselves and look at their constitution.
Yep.
And guess what? They're going to have to rewrite that as well.
Yeah.
And to me, this is probably a very, very good catalyst to make sure that happens.
Yeah, 100%. Now, you said about having a bit of common sense and a bit of direction and maybe somebody bashing the stick out. There's a job description there for you, Stan. And if anybody was willing to wave the common sense baseball bat, I'm pretty sure it would be you. Now, with that in mind, and I know how direct you'll be, if you look at one of the things that's been an absolute crutch, handicap, obstacle, fence, whatever you want to say about it, is this blooming documentation and the fact that we can't just digitalize. And all the excuses and the initiatives and people wanting it and understanding it, the industry knows where the blocks are, okay, but the industry needs it. And why on earth now can't we use this, the hygiene argument and the crisis, as the impetus to do something that's so long overdue? Because it doesn't make sense the amount of times that people are having to face each other, hand over documents, transfer documents, put documents in a pigeonhole, put them on a tray, put them in a bag. It's madness. So also customs and authorities who want blue ink, green ink, brown ink or intermittent ink, they've also got to start changing and realising what needs to be done. Baseball bat or not, Stan?
Well, first baseball bat I'm going to give you is, and I love this guy, okay? But I have no faith whatsoever in associations to change what we need to be changed. And it's the old story about what's a camel? It's a horse designed by a committee. It's just doesn't work. It has no historical precedence of ever working. I'm going back to the 80s when I worked for KLM. You know, I don't know if you know this or not, but we withdrew from IATA as KLM Cargo. And we did that for a reason, because what we found was that a common solution leads to commoditization. And common solutions are usually a compromise. I was talking to Ram Menon. I don't think you'll mind me using his name in this conversation. And we talked about CEIV and Pharma Aero and all these things. And he said that the reason he refused to join any of those things when he was running it is because they had a product which was better what they were proposing to put in themselves. So why would they do that? His premise was that if you can do something on your own, you can get your unique selling points, and you can get your unique selling points if you treat cargo seriously, which Emirates always did. And I believe in that. KLM and Emirates are good examples, and they were longtime partners when I was running KLM anyways, because we were doing things on our own, and then we became the benchmark that other people followed. So it's do you go to an association to set common standards, and with common standards you get a generic solution, and with a generic solution you get mediocrity, and we don't need mediocrity right now. You know, the most efficient way of moving anything with quality, speed, and transparency is on a direct passenger flight going from one point to the other. From Hong Kong to London Heathrow or Hong Kong to Chicago, nothing's faster than BA, United Airlines, or anyone else who serves that route with a 777 belly. Yet, why do we fail? I mean, we're faster than Amazon, Alibaba, UPS, DHL, FedEx, yet we don't fix it. Why? Because the airports and the ground handling are not used efficiently by the airlines and the airport authorities to make things happen. So that's number one. Digitization, you have UN Resolution 33 called the single window. So what happens with that? IATA comes up with one record.
Yeah.
Why? I mean, you know, KLM in Amsterdam should be using single window and going in Amsterdam and implementing it now, because that's the future. China has now embarked on e-freight. They are going to implement and force e-freight. Oman is doing the same thing.
From a government perspective.
From a government perspective, the Secretary General of ICAO told me personally in her office, and Vlad Zubkov was there, and so was Stephen Pullman's there as witnesses, that in her mandate, she wants the digitization of air cargo to be implemented. And she's Chinese, and she's from China. Brilliant woman, absolutely brilliant. And then, as Des and I are both advisors to one of the airports in China, we learned that the CAAC in China and IATA are working on a program to implement e-freight in China. Now, if China embarks on e-freight, do you think that its biggest trading partner, still, like it or not, the US, especially by air, because Trans-Pacific by air is going to continue, you don't think that they're going to have to comply? Because if you're going to export something to China, it's going to have to be e-freight. If you're going to import something from China, it's going to have to be e-freight. So we explain this to the airports we work with, and they get it. They're starting. That's what I said. I'm very positive about what's happening in the US and Canada. That's one thing. The second thing is, you can put these systems in without CapEx, but nobody can, you have the technicians who are good at explaining how a widget works. Yeah. Nobody explains what to do with that widget and what's in it for you. And that's where we play a role. And when I say we, I mean all of us that are cargo core professionals. We play that role because we have to explain now what's in it for you, all right? That means for your trucking company, less dwell time, less environmental pollution. For an airport, meeting your standards, et cetera, et cetera. And every segment of the industry we're talking to, and they all get it. And as a matter of fact, freight forwarders who everyone thinks are against e-freight, we've had conversations with two major freight forwarders here in Canada in the last 48 hours. Both of them would say, can we be a trial? Can we be a trial in the proof of concept? Because now all of a sudden they get it. Okay.
We had the same feedback from Kuehne Nagel and DHL, who came
precisely.
And they're also saying that they're ready and they're capable.
But nobody's talking to them with a degree of common sense, and you're not going to get that, unfortunately, from TIACA and IATA. I hate to say it, but because it's just not going to happen, because it's a one-on-one personal discussion where a guy looks you in the eye, and you say, look, I know in Toronto that your trucking has to line up, or we know in Atlanta that there's fistfights in the past without a truck marshaling. You have to have that personal interaction with the people that will accept what you're saying. And that's why I think, that's why I'm pro one-on-one. And I think once you set a benchmark, others will follow. That's our approach, and it's working. But one last thing, you hit a sore point with me about associations, okay? Look, it's always failed, and it always will fail. I'm sorry. Common solutions, if an airport or an airline wants to make money as a business, you have to be creative and innovative and do your own thing. You can't accept common solutions if you're an airport and be competitive in your region. You can't accept common solutions if you're a GHA.
Yeah,
yeah.
That's fair enough. But I think what we're talking about as well, my understanding, is that some of these common standards, they're to get you to a point where that's the minimum set requirements. And from there, organizations can differentiate themselves with their own USPs of what they do. But there needs to be a common foundation of expectation and minimum requirements. Otherwise, we're all over the place, which is what we don't want to be doing.
But Chris, the common denominator for everyone who takes the time to get involved and be educated about this is UN Resolution 33 single window.
Clear. I mean,
So what I'm saying is, do you this is the fun part of our conversation, but what I'm saying to you is, why does Air Canada, United, and KLM need a third party to interpret a UN resolution which his government has signed off on? If they have cargo as a core business, they will look into it and create their own unique selling point, and to the benefit of their airport and their airline. Yeah. I'm not here to make the industry new and wonderful, but anybody I work with, that's my job, to make them new and wonderful. Yeah. And I don't encourage anybody to take generic solutions. I'm for bespoke solutions based on your trade lanes and your needs.
Yeah, I think what it is, Stan, is it's a generic platform to allow more innovative solutions. But there has to be a solid foundation that everybody understands is the minimum requirements to get into the game.
And also, let's not forget the role of certain associations. I'm not going to talk about all four, the ones I've named, but certainly the one I headed from a cargo perspective. It had a much wider role. So, before we look at how we're going to change, the role they had in terms of standard setting should not be undermined, okay? In terms of things that they did for the establishment of the settlement system at a time to make life a lot easier, should not be underestimated. So, I mean, they do have a role, particularly when you represent carriers far and wide, north, south, east, and west, of every denomination, of every language, of every government, some state-owned, some private. It's incredibly difficult when you are trying to create something that does become uniformal to allow trade to transact. Yeah. So I think that's one thing. I think where Stan's coming from, I can understand, what he's looking at when it looks at advancing, accelerating certain things between entities. Okay, and that's where the association no longer plays its part. It's down to the innovation and to the to the energies of the leadership of those enterprises. Okay, so I take that. From my perspective, all I would say is that if I take a look at the airports and everything we've talked about digitization today, the UN 33 should be made mandatory.
That's it.
The moment it's made mandatory, but ICAO would then make that recommendation to its members.
Yeah,
it's done it already. 2005, Des.
Right. So what I'm saying is, if that is the case, then what we should be looking at today is that people have some work to do to go to their government and say, you signed up to this in 2005.
Why aren't you?
Why have you not enforced it in your own playing field?
Yeah.
Okay, so what stops you? Now let's just come back and take one issue. Talk about the States. We've got a hygiene issue with the virus, but let's go back to a security issue precipitated by an event in 2010 with the toner cartridge incident. Okay, that nearly brought all of air cargo to a bloody standstill. When I take a look at that, following from that, we said we've got to provide advanced air cargo data. So there was a trial undertaken by the US CBP in 2012 that we will start to provide ACAS trials. Here we are, 9 years on, 8 years on, certainly, but I think the first trials, it may have taken place in back end of 2011, let's say 2012. So 8 years on, we are still trialing on ACAS. It hasn't become mandatory. Why is that? You know, for me, that's part of the issues that we have. If we have something called the AEO in Europe, why isn't every participant that's moving air cargo an AEO operator?
Yep.
Okay, so these are the sort of, I believe, issues that we should look to the regulator for, to say, you've got to play a much bigger part. You can't just continue to recommend.
Yep.
If you now want to sanitize, for all the reasons we've discussed, the air cargo supply chain, you have the bells and whistles, you've got all the infrastructure, you've got the technology. Make sure, firstly, your customs and security regime have it. Okay, make that investment, put it in place, kick it off from January 2021.
Yep.
Let's see what happens.
Yep. And I think there's a time now to put two divisions above what they've been playing, which is recommended, and they need to introduce critical and important above that. And anything that's critical, deadline, must be done. Otherwise, there's sanctions, penalties, etc. So
you know that the postal authorities, excuse me, you know that the postal authorities are implementing that AMS system by mandate from CBP in the US. Any parcel moving into the US in a mail bag now has to be treated the same as cargo.
And it should be.
Love it.
Of course it should be.
Love it.
One of the reasons why you don't see mail being loaded on any of these passenger freighters is because they don't know what the hell's inside. So you know, I mean, yes, but that is a mandate now. That's a rule. And the postal authorities are panicking about it because they realize now that if it's the same rules as air freight and it takes 15 days, well, people will just pay a little bit more for air freight and switch it away from them. So now they're panicking, trying to find a solution. These things are self-fulfilling prophecies. It's going to come, Des. I mean, all you need, and the AMS system is obligatory now for China, for example, imports. China moving to e-freight, okay? You can have your suspicions as to why. Because what happens with e-freight, you get transparency, all right? Both on import and export. And transparency, when we have trade wars, becomes more important. And as we discussed yesterday, Des, you and I, if you think protectionism today is bad, just wait to what's going to hit us in the coming years now as we try to economically rebound. Protectionism is going to come in everywhere. And with protectionism comes, what the hell is coming into my country, and is it undermining my business case? And therefore, I want to know everything. And the minute they want transparency, you're going to get digital systems being mandated. It probably won't be for the right reasons. It'll be for economic security, and it'll be for security, meaning no more toner cartridges. Yeah. But it'll come.
Yeah.
And it won't come because TIACA, IATA, CIFA, or anyone else pushes it. It'll be some calamity that they want to put it in. That's unfortunately the way this bloody business has been working for years. We're reactive, and anything that's good and proactive, like the single window in 2005, CACAG or GAGAG or whatever the hell it was called, you shouldn't have been going there saying, we want to collaborate. You should be saying, UN 33 says this, the governments are signing on, we're going to do it. Okay, guys, let's go. And
that's fair. And now is the time for people to come together, irrespective of what's happened, and start doing things for the right purposes. Now, with the pressures, and you both have mentioned 2024, 2025, 5 years, etc. Now, there's enough pressures on the industry. What do you think is going to happen? And do you think that there'll be, whether it's quotas or there'll be certain stipulations with regards to whether you call it onshoring, home shoring, or close shoring? What do you think is going to happen there? Just me personally now, if I was taking a risk perspective, I would be saying that a certain percentage has got to be manufactured or produced in our own country and for the purposes, and anybody else who wants to bring it in can only do so once that percentage has been achieved. So how do you feel that's going to impact as well on the industry now over the next few years?
You want me to, Des, you want to go
Yes.
first?
Well, you kick off for the first.
Okay, I have done a lot of research on this. I've been talking to major automotive companies in the U.S. Southeast and lots of people. Of course, the U.S. government wants everything to be reshored, brought back. Okay, yeah. But what he fails to understand is, for example, China is the big problem at the moment. What he fails to understand is a lot of, you can't blame China for what happened with Ford Motors. Ford Motors decided to go to China, or General Motors decided to go to China. And the reason they did that is they want to participate in the domestic market. So to think that they're going to move manufacturing back to the US for cars that they're going to sell in China, no, it's not going to happen. What we've heard from just-in-time manufacturing processes,
yeah,
the scary part for the scheduled airlines. There are dedicated freighters now flying and avoiding scheduled airlines in order to make sure that they can comply with their just-in-time. But now, in talking to one of the big automotive manufacturers, they're going to start moving to what they call, believe it or not, just-in-case inventory.
Yes.
Okay?
Yeah.
So just in case we have another pandemic, we'll have enough to get us through 3 to 6 months. That's number one. Nearshoring, one of the reasons of Chrysler Motors told me moving the production of their Jeep into Mexico, they're not doing it. And the reason why is with robotics, they can only save $260 a car. And at $260 a car, you can't even transport it back from Mexico into the US. So all of this stuff is ridiculous. What you're going to see, though, in the geopolitical sense, you're going to see a lot of China plus one happening. That's number one. Number two, you're going to see China focusing more on the Belt and Road countries. I mean, Des and I are quite aware of that. Putin said it, I think, about the U.S. Dealing with the U.S. is a 4-year cycle of what's going to happen. Every election, you never know what's going to hit you. So geopolitical issues are going to play a big part in logistics supply chains as well. My personal opinion, you're not going to move, it just goes so deep, it goes down even to education. You can move in Foxconn in Zhengzhou, where Des and I, the 300,000 people work there, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and the complex takes up about 10 city blocks. And they have engineers that can change a widget in an iPhone in 24 hours. You can't do that in the States. Even Steve Jobs told, I think it was Bush at the time, we don't have the engineers here. We don't have the training here. So we can't bring it back even if we wanted to. So putting all that together, what does it mean for us in the future with air logistics? Whatever continues to fly by air, right? After everybody's decided nearshoring, reshoring, whatever, or China plus one, a couple of things are going to happen. Korea, Japan, and the US is talking about it, already created major funds to finance their companies to move out of China and move somewhere else. So it could be, we see more moving to India, we can see more moving to Southeast Asia, or Israel even, or wherever, and then supplying the US or supplying Canada or supplying Europe. That's number one. Number two, what you're going to see is where people stay for nearshoring, and it'll be made in the USA or made in Canada or made in Germany. It'll be mostly for domestic consumption only, and it's going to be higher priced. And then what happens is that if Apple goes that route because they were politically forced to, Samsung will love it because they'll come in with a better, faster iPhone type solution, which will be half the price of an American produced iPhone. So all these competitive pressures are involved in it. Supply chain, in my mind, the companies now are looking at just in time, and they want to continue with airlines. But if the airlines don't get their act together, the one last statement, Chris, what did that automotive company tell me? They got 3 criteria in deciding on a supply chain. Number one, time. They want 48 hours door to door, guaranteed. This is Germany to the US. 48 hours, number one. Number two on their list of choosing in an RFP, transparency. They want to know every inch of the way where that cargo is, what's happening to it, if there's a problem, did something get damaged, is the car not loaded on the airplane because it didn't fit, is the airplane delayed? They want to know everything in that whole cycle, because if that car doesn't show up, for example, they can't do a reveal of a new product. If that part doesn't show up, the production line shuts down, which is $100,000 an hour, they told me.
Yeah.
So second is transparency. And then last is price.
Yep.
So what does that tell you? How can you get transparency? There's only one way, with data.
Yep.
And the shipper has to be able to, and that's where the freight forwarders have to understand it. The freight forwarders have to understand that the beneficial owner of cargo, the BOC, which is the guy paying the bills, in this case, it's the automotive factory in US who's responsible, not the manufacturer in Germany. The BOC, if he wants this, right, and you want it to go via Atlanta or go via Philadelphia, for example, and not have to go on a dedicated freighter, you have to give them transparency. And you can only do that with data, and your processes with the GHA on the airport have to be immediately on a truck and on its way to the factory.
Yeah, 100%. 100%.
Yeah.
Now, thank you for that, Stan. Now, Des, just to change the direction a little bit, because we're getting near the end, something that I know you're very passionate about. Lots of lessons learned, and there's going to be even more lessons learned over the next 5 to 7 months, because there's going to be a second wave. It's going to be different, but it's also going to be very challenging, and unfortunately there's going to be more negative impact on people. Now, with that comes a different focus on the way people lead, and I'm talking about all the way down now to somebody who's responsible for themselves and a few people, or themselves and a department, or themselves and a shift, and also manager. So there's a newness now that's required with how to lead coming out of and within a crisis, and also now dealing with the anxieties, the pressures, whether it's human factors, whether it's anything. Just understanding that somebody who gets on a forklift after a furlough or being off for a little while might be thinking about childminders, might be thinking about, are they going to keep their job? What's going to happen next? So the newness of how people manage and lead and communicate with the people that remain in the industry is going to be so, so important.
Correct. Well, you've hit the nail on the head, because let's not forget what's happened to the poor employer, during this period. Our industry, more than any other industry, I would argue, has been hit so badly. And while we in air cargo can feel a little bit proud that finally, the air cargo industry has got its recognition from the very highest level of government as to its importance. So, rather than puffing our chest out, let's take a look at the human factor and all the impact it's had on jobs, not just in our industry, right across the board. So if we are now leaders and we've got to look at our employers, now's the time to try and think about, how do we keep them motivated?
Yep.
How do we keep them employed? How do we keep them even wanting to come in? How, to risk themselves? Because of course, they're going to be hearing all sorts of stories. Is your boss making you go into work? What protection is he providing for you in the environment? Is it safe, secure? But let's take a look at a much bigger picture in terms of the future. Where I think previously you've had hierarchical management, I think you'll have flat management. Okay, I think it'll be a lot flatter. I think communication is going to be the absolute key. I think trying to make sure your people are multifaceted.
Yeah.
Before we employed people for specific roles. Do you know what? The employer of the future is going to have to be competent across many areas of his company's workplace.
Yeah.
And I think the onus will fall on the leaders of tomorrow to make sure that they have that competence within all of their employees. And it's not going to be easy. I'm not for 1 minute, nice to be able to say it, very, very much more difficult to enforce
yeah,
or implement. But my view is, if you're going to be a leader of the future, and you're going to have to satisfy, because we're still in a service environment, and the consumer is going to want transparency. He's going to want things far, far quicker. He's going to want it yesterday, and he's not going to be able to pay for all of that because his own bank balance, okay, is at a stretch. Then the service providers, and I look at air cargo, we're going to have to make sure whoever works within us, does a lot more with less. And therefore, if you're going to do that, other than the adoption of technology and automation, you're going to have people who are multifaceted. And I think the emphasis on training is going to become important, keeping them motivated. So the only way you keep them motivated is their bosses are engaged with them. You're telling them how they're performing. You're telling them what you expect of them. You're encouraging them to do something that's out of their comfort zone.
Yeah.
And all of those things will, I think, play a very important part, Chris.
Yeah, 100%. So Gallup and their engagement programs will probably be very popular now moving forward.
Yeah.
I think one of the things that's so important, Des, which you covered there, is everybody's going to look back, or they're going to look at where they are, and they're going to know where it happened, when it happened, and what happened. But now we have to tell people why it happened and why we have to do certain things to get out of it.
Yeah. Chris, don't forget, this industry of ours emerged from very much a state-run, enterprise. We were all civil servants in the 50s, 60s, 70s, until, the bulk of us entered into private enterprise. Unfortunately, all these decades later, the legacy of still being state-owned remains within our working protocols, right? If the collective bargaining agreements are still there, the way you could do certain things, you couldn't do certain things. If you're in the ramp, you couldn't go into the warehouse. If you're in the warehouse, you couldn't become a loader. Well, guess what? I think that's all going to change.
It has to, Des. Multitasking, upskilling, and rotational working practices so that people keep their eye in is going to be critical. Now, gents, we're a little bit overrun, but I've enjoyed the interaction between the two of you and with the two of you. And I'm surprised, Des, that you didn't dip into some of that beautiful liquid behind you at certain points, but fair play to you.
Well, somebody said there were half-empty bottles or half-full bottles, Stan, right? And as we were talking airports, I thought I'd bring a bottle of port because I just like the idea of, it had a nice ring to it. And that's full, I can assure you. Yeah.
Fair play, yeah. Now, listen, just to finish, lads, and a bit hypothetically, but before, I just want to give a good shout out to ICAO and EASA because their flexibility and speed and distributing best practices, I think, was incredible. And also some of the other areas, and also not to be too negative with the representative bodies. I think now if they've got a chance to come together, help the regulators to say, look, you put this out, you give a clear directive, we're going to make sure we support you. It makes it easier to give that particular directive to the industry, which is necessary. Now, if the two of you, in your positions, previous positions, experience, etc., and I've asked everybody else the same three questions, what I'd like is, if you had the ability, just tell me what three things would you commit to that would help the whole situation, and what three things would you expect from the rest of the industry or the business to then support your initiatives? So if we can start, who wants to start?
Well, I'm happy to start.
All right.
Because it's easier for me, having been out of full-time employment since 2014. But if I was still in...
But you're looking well, Chris. And if ever there was an advert for more people to do so, it's you, my friend. I haven't seen a single wrinkle. So after this, I need to know what cream you're using.
Well, Chris,
it's glorious cream.
It's glorious cream, and it's a bottle of wine actually named after her.
I was going to say that. But I didn't want to.
But anyway, what I would commit to is I would be far more aggressive in pushing the digital agenda. Obviously, because I believed in it all along. I've never believed why on earth we in air cargo, and particularly as carriers, who got paid for moving freight from A to B, but didn't get paid for moving paper from A to B, conducted the carriage of paper, and it became heavier and heavier over the decades. So the first thing is, I would commit to really doing something very drastic with the help of the regulatory body if I was still in one of my former roles. The second thing is from a collaborative and transparent perspective. Again, I happen to have been a member of an alliance airline, and at the time when we became an alliance for the very first time, when it was first created, and although it was designed initially for the passenger side, we tried desperately to do a number of things on the cargo side without being asked. And we took the initiative in Europe. And people like Bob Bingley, Chris, your former colleague, and of course, Peter Chase at the time when he was at United, and with the help of SAS and I'm trying to think of his name, at Scandinavian Airlines and of course at Thai.
Peter Grunland.
It was Peter. It was
Peter Grunland.
And Peter and we all went to see whether we could take some initiative to align our operations. Okay, this is before any knowledge of antitrust, breaking the antitrust rule or law. And, we came away with a pretty tepid set of results. Well, I can tell you, if one of the things I'd commit to if I was an alliance now is we would be doing far, far more together as a group of airlines than we'd ever do. Yeah. And my third thing would be that certainly I'd look to change the foundation of who I was working with. I wouldn't work now for one entity and be happy with one entity. I think the future is going to see any of the organizations, whether you're an airline, whether you're a ground handler, whether you're a logistics player, I think you're going to see a very, very different model going forward. And these players will become fully integrated service providers. They'll literally become an integrated entity in their own right, and they will have to pursue some of the vast volumes of e-commerce traffic that's going to be the catalyst to growth for the years to come. Yeah. And so I think we'd become a very, very different, and we'd have to bite the bullet here. And whether that upset a few people or not, it wouldn't bother me, but it would be something I would encourage my board to do, and that is to literally transcend all those services through one brand.
Yep. And then have a common transparency tracking and everything else that you've spoken about.
The consumer would demand that of us.
Yep. Stan?
A couple of things. You mentioned three things. The number one is, and what we've been doing basically is putting the industry a bit before SASI's own returns. And the proof is in the pudding. We published for free 7 white papers so far for the industry. The latest one is 8 pages long, research paper on why you should digitize. We put it up on LinkedIn just yesterday. Yeah. We started out with why the air cargo has to come up to the C-suite and be treated as a core business. Yeah. And the last one was a new business model on how to go forward. And then the latest one is on digitization. And the digitization lays out the whole plan. And we threw that out there in the public. We didn't try to get a consulting contract with somebody. We threw it out in the public because if people would sit up and listen in Africa or somewhere where they might read this, way beyond my personal reach, so be it. I want the industry to change. And we think those white papers, which are well thought out and very well received, by the way, can point the way forward. That's number one. The most important thing, though, and as Des and myself and yourself and others who have some voice in this industry, we have to get cargo accepted in the boardrooms as a core business. I mean, this has to stop. I mean, look, I won't name the association, but Des can relate to it. I personally met at a dinner, a lunch actually. Somebody's at the top level of one of these associations we're talking about. And there had just been a big meeting in Singapore, and I said to him, yeah, how did it go? And he said, oh, it went well and everything else. And I said, there's a lot that could be done with cargo and everything else. And we really should get going now with digitization and product portfolios and all that. And his answer was, Stan, cargo is not that important to passenger airlines. After I almost fell off the floor, I picked up the phone I went on the street and I phoned the guy and told him, the guy who does cargo, and told him what I'd heard, and he said he's not surprised. So now those same people, if they continue to think that this is C-suite people, right? If these people don't understand that cargo is a core business now, I don't know when they ever will. So we've got a responsibility to make sure that the message gets there. You know, pulling combis out of in the middle of COVID-19, 17,000 people reacted on the web to my open letter to Ben and to Peter Elbers that don't do this. You're going to need this, and they eventually put them back in. But why did they put them back in? Because Phillips phoned them. Cargo professionals were saying this is desperately needed. Don't do it. But this shouldn't be. Cargo has to get up in the boardroom as a core business. That's the third thing. Now, paperless and digitization. Yeah, Des, I agree with you 2,000%. Because it's the key to allow, you mentioned before, integration. Yes, we call it virtual integrator possibilities with these data systems. If the ground handling companies and the digital companies and the airports cooperate, any airline can handle any piece of cargo that they fly in a virtual integrator way through various suppliers, be it a forwarder who brings it to you, be it a trucking company you engage to do the last mile, or a customs broker that you engage at the airport of arrival to do exclusively do all your customs clearance, etc.
Yeah.
You can create a virtual integrator system. And the very last thing on that is, once you've done it as an airport, you're giving the whole economic environment, the ecosystem of industry that's around your airport a boost, because they can be competitive on both ends. So yeah, I think those are the three things we got to focus on.
Good. And now, Des, back to you. What three things would you like to see coming from the community or the supply chain that would help with the three things that you suggested that you would commit to?
Chris, this is air cargo handling and logistics, and you certainly stand for years. We've been talking about an entity that's really played a much lower profile role because they're focused on the passenger side, bar one or two US airports, and a couple of Europeans, maybe Hong Kong and Singapore. But I'd like to see the airports finally, in the light of what's happened through their very solemn operations, begin to take a huge interest in cargo, and to a point where they start to print the expectations, the consumer expectations of what their airport can handle and how quickly they can handle it. So, a common set of KPIs. If ACI wanted to really come to the fore, they could say, we'll take the lead with what's going on with UN 33. First thing we'll say is we're a UN 33 airport. Everything through our airport's digitized. We have, a speed of execution for cargo in and out of X minutes, Y minutes. I would love to see that come from an airport. Okay?
And insist that all of their tenants had to follow and comply, or like Stan said earlier, you said about getting a partner to assist you if they can't do it themselves.
Correct. You then don't have the right to take on a lease at the airport if you can't comply to those standards. Yeah.
Well, Des, let me interrupt with you on the RFP for the two airports on the new buildings.
Yeah,
it's in there.
Perfect. That's perfect. Well, that's the sort of commitment I would love to see. And secondly, I would love to, I wouldn't. I'd like to just stick to two, Chris, if you forgive me.
Yeah.
For me, I would love to be able to see a timetable where, there would be an end date to the use of documentation.
Yeah.
Okay. And so, if whoever has to make that decision, whether it's thrust upon us, or whether, somehow the collaborative spirit really grips every single body, and we're saying we'll make a decision ourselves, and from this date, be it July of next year, be it 2022, I don't mind if we have to wait another whole year, given what everybody's going to have to tackle. And I'm sympathetic at what they're facing in the light of the current environment. Okay,
Yeah, it won't be
absolutely drastic. So for me, if they said 2022, January 2022, no more paper in the air cargo supply chain, I would love that.
Yeah, and it won't be from collaboration, Des. I think we all know that. And some people say it's a word that's too often used in our industry. So it's definitely going to be thrust upon us, as you said, forced upon us at worst, and the baseball bat approach where that's it. This is the deadline. That's the only way it's going to happen.
Well, I'll help lobby for that.
Yeah. And now, Stan, very quickly, my friend, because we're way over. What are the three things you'd like to see in return?
Basically, I can't but compliment what Des just said. Look, safety, security, quality, speed. These are the things. These are the buzzwords of today, and we have to get them in there. I keep going back to we have a diamond that just needs to be polished now. E-commerce, you mentioned, Des, we haven't spoken much about it, but you know that the whole world is shifting to it. I mean, UPS did a webinar yesterday. What they've said about pharmaceuticals, they completely have their own way of doing it, and it's the right way of doing it. They talk about e-commerce. Before, business-to-business e-commerce was 10.6 trillion globally versus B2C e-commerce was 2, right? Now it's shifted. It's 70% of their business is now B2C versus B2B. And they have to gear up to that. They're hiring 150,000 more employees to do it.
Yep.
The airlines, all they're doing is taking consolidations of that very valuable cargo, putting it on very valuable space, which is the fastest in the world, a point-to-point passenger belly flight. And they're not making any money on it. The GHA isn't making any money on it. The airport's not making any money on it. And all of those people need the money to invest in digital processes, to invest in people. Biggest problem with ground handling companies right now in the US, can't get staff. They can't get staff because the US CARE program is paying more for people to stay home than for people to work in the warehouse. Why are they paying those people so low? It's simple. The airlines are not paying them. Why are the airlines not paying them? Because the freight forwarders aren't paying the airlines. This has got to stop.
Yeah.
Okay. If you want things to change, there has to be a fair return on investment. You have to be profitable, and you have to have enough of a cushion that you can invest in the future. Wake up and smell the roses, industry.
Yeah.
I mean,
no,
if you keep
that's
treating
clear.
your airport and you keep treating your GHA the way you do, they will never invest in this technology. There are material handling systems and automated supply and retrieval systems available to put in warehouses that would make a truck turnaround happen in 45 minutes and cargo pre-position and everything else. But it takes money to invest in that.
Yeah.
The airlines aren't making a return to pay the GHA. So the only way the airlines can make a return is to come into the 19th century. Then we can start talking about the 20th and 21st.
Yeah.
But this is ridiculous. The first automated airway bill was sent in Canada in 1988 by a company called TDNI. And we're still tapping ourselves on the back because we have 50 or 60% airway bill. No, we can't let it happen again this time. We have to go for a complete e-freight.
And I'm thinking of starting an aviation quiz. So I'm going to put you on one of the teams. So I need you to find a couple of people so that
I'm the trivia pursuit guy, right?
That's the one, my friend. Right, listen, boys.
Well, I also sat on the panel for the very first CAS.
Yeah.
That was in Montreal as well. So,
man, if I've got a sweatshirt that I was using with a lot of lads. It was like a zip up that we did when we went on the various ski tours. Every year they put the destinations down. If it was to do with the things you've done, my friend, it wouldn't be a sweatshirt. It would be a long robe or cloak that people would have to carry. So I don't doubt that in any way. But listen, it's lovely to talk to the pair of you. You're both very outspoken, very sensible, very direct, and I know how much you care. And the principle of this session is from crisis to care. So it's lovely to see two people who care so much. And again, just a last shout out, everybody who's been displaced, please God, the industry will keep you informed, communicated so that you can keep in touch. And then when you get the opportunity to come back, you won't feel as if you've missed too much. And good luck with everything for everybody.
Yeah.
So thank you, lads.
Thanks, Chris.
Yeah, thank you, Chris.
Chris, just one
Thanks,
last word. All those white papers I mentioned for free, they're all generic. They're not focused. You can just go on our web and download them. But
and we're probably going to put them up. We'll probably put them up as well. So
you're welcome to. I can send you the originals. But I mean, they're all generic, and they're all focused, and they're free. And it's combined probably about 300 years worth of air cargo experience in those papers.
Stan, that's a lovely word to leave with, and especially one from you. Free.
Okay.
Free.
Absolutely free.
Lovely.
All right. Take care, lads.
Okay. Thanks again, Chris.
Cheers.
Thanks, Dan.
Bye.
Cheers, Daz. Be good. I'll talk to you soon.